Hi, let me ask you something simple. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow and gas prices had doubled overnight? Not because of inflation, not because of some supply chain problem, but because two of the most powerful forces in the world, the United States and Iran, finally stopped talking and started something that nobody can take back. I know that sounds dramatic, but here's the thing, it's not as far away as you think. Right now, as I'm sitting here putting this story together, the situation between the US and Iran is sitting at one of the most dangerous points it has been in years. Talks have collapsed. Sanctions are tighter than ever. Iran's nuclear program is running at levels that are making a lot of very serious people very nervous. And the Persian Gulf, one of the most critical waterways on the entire planet, is being watched more closely right now than it has been in a long time. And in the middle of all of this, there is one question that nobody in the mainstream is asking loudly enough. If this actually goes hot, if the tension between the US and Iran crosses that line, what happens to oil? Because some of the most respected energy analysts on the planet are throwing around a number that sounds almost impossible. $200 a barrel. Let that sink in for a second. $200 per barrel. And if that happens, and I want to walk you through exactly why it could, the ripple effects on your daily life would be unlike anything most of us have ever experienced. This is not a war story. This is a money story. This is your story. Let's get into it. How did US and Iran get here? To really understand what's happening right now, I have to take you back a little bit, because the tension between the United States and Iran didn't start yesterday. This is a relationship that has been broken, patched, broken again, and broken worse for decades. And to understand where we are today, you need to understand how we got here. It goes all the way back to 1979, the Iranian Revolution, a moment that completely flipped the relationship between Washington and Tehran upside down. Before 1979, Iran was actually a close American ally in the Middle East. After 1979, it became one of America's most complicated and persistent adversaries. And from that point forward, the two countries have been locked in this strange, dangerous dance. Never fully at war, but never anywhere close to peace either. Fast forward to 2015. For a brief moment, it actually looked like things might change. The Obama administration, along with several other world powers, negotiated the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a nuclear deal that was supposed to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for significant sanctions relief. It wasn't perfect. A lot of people had serious problems with it. But it was something, it was a framework, it was a conversation. And then 2018 happened. The Trump administration pulled the United States out of that deal, completely walked away, and didn't just walk away. They launched what they called a maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Tighter sanctions, more restrictions, more economic pain designed to force Iran back to the table on American terms. But here's what actually happened instead. Iran didn't collapse under that pressure. Iran pushed back, and part of how they pushed back was by dramatically accelerating their nuclear program. The limits they had agreed to under the 2015 deal, gone. Their uranium enrichment started climbing and climbing and climbing. By the time anyone tried to seriously restart negotiations, Iran's nuclear program had grown so much larger that the original deal's framework barely fit anymore. So you had a new administration in Washington trying to revive talks. You had Iran sitting across the table with a much stronger nuclear hand than before. You had years of accumulated mistrust on both sides, and you had a region, the broader Middle East, that was more volatile than ever. The talks that followed were slow, complicated, and ultimately went nowhere. And now, here we are, two countries, decades of history, a broken diplomatic process, a nuclear program that keeps advancing, and a region where one wrong move, one miscalculation, one incident that spirals out of control could set off something that the entire world would feel, not just in the headlines, not just in foreign policy briefings, at the gas pump, in your energy bill, in the price of everything you buy. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. The Strait of Hormuz, the most important waterway you've never thought about. I want you to pull up a map in your head for a second. Find the Middle East. Now look at the bottom of Iran. There's a tiny strip of water sitting right there, connecting the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world's oceans. It's narrow. At its tightest point, it's only about 21 miles wide. That's the Strait of Hormuz. And that tiny 21-mile stretch of water is arguably the single most important piece of ocean on the entire planet. Here's why. Roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through that strait every single day. We're talking about approximately 17 to 18 million barrels of oil moving through that narrow channel daily. Oil heading to Europe, oil heading to Asia, oil heading to markets all over the world that depend on it to keep their economies running. Think about that for a second. 1/5 of the world's oil through a waterway that is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. And who sits right on the edge of that waterway? Iran. Iran has military installations overlooking the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has naval vessels operating in those waters. Iran has missiles that could reach ships passing through that channel. And Iran has made it very clear on multiple occasions that if it ever feels sufficiently threatened, closing or disrupting the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely on the table as a response. Now, let's see me put that in perspective for you. In 2019, there was a period of escalating tension in the Persian Gulf. Iran shot down an American drone. There were attacks on oil tankers in the region. For a few weeks, the world held its breath, watching that waterway. And even without any actual closure of the strait, just the tension, just the uncertainty, oil prices jumped significantly. Just the fear of disruption moved markets. Now imagine an actual disruption. Imagine a scenario where conflict breaks out between the US and Iran makes good on its threat to interfere with shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Even partially, even temporarily. The ripple effects would be immediate and they would be massive. Asian economies that depend heavily on Gulf oil, Japan, South Korea, China, India, would feel it almost instantly. European energy markets would tighten overnight. And American consumers, even though the US itself is now a major oil producer, would not be insulated from what happens to global prices. Because oil is a global commodity. When the global price moves, everybody feels it. There is no hiding from it. And here is the uncomfortable reality that most people don't fully appreciate. There is no easy alternative to the Strait of Hormuz. There are some pipeline routes that bypass it, but they have nowhere near the capacity to replace what moves through that strait every day. If that waterway gets seriously disrupted, the world does not have a ready backup plan that makes the problem go away quickly. This is why energy analysts get so serious when they talk about a potential US-Iran conflict. It's not just about the two countries involved, it's about that strait. It's about what happens to global oil supply when the world's most important waterway becomes a war zone. And right now, that waterway is being watched more nervously than it has been in years. If war happens, what happens to oil? Okay, so this is the part where things get really serious, because I want to walk you through something that most news coverage skips over completely. They talk about the politics, they talk about the military side, but they rarely sit down and actually map out step by step what a US-Iran conflict would do to the oil market in real time. So let's do that right now. Day one of a serious military conflict between the US and Iran. What happens? The first thing that happens is panic, and in oil markets, panic is immediate. Traders don't wait for actual supply disruptions to start moving prices. The moment a credible conflict breaks out, futures markets react within hours. We have seen this pattern over and over again throughout history. The Gulf War, the Iraq invasion, every major Middle East escalation. Oil prices spike fast before a single barrel of supply is actually affected purely on fear and uncertainty. In a serious US-Iran conflict, that initial panic spike alone could push oil prices up significantly. Some analysts estimate an immediate jump of anywhere between $20 to $40 per barrel just on the news alone. But that's just day one. Now, let's talk about what happens if Iran follows through on the Strait of Hormuz threat. Even a partial disruption, not a complete closure, just enough interference to slow down tanker traffic, create insurance nightmares for shipping companies, force rerouting would start removing barrels from the market almost immediately. Shipping insurance costs would skyrocket. Some tanker operators would simply refuse to enter the Gulf until the situation stabilized. Others would demand massive risk premiums. The result? Less oil moving, faster. And remember what I told you about the market right now. We are already in a tight supply environment. OPEC has been keeping production controlled. Global inventories are not sitting at comfortable levels. There is very little cushion to absorb a shock like this. So you take a tight market, add a panic spike, add actual supply disruption from Hormuz. See, interference. Add the removal of Iranian oil exports, which even under sanctions are still finding their way into global markets through various channels, and you start to see how the math gets very ugly very quickly. Now, here is where that $200 number starts to become less crazy than it sounds. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and several major independent energy research firms have all modeled conflict scenarios involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. And in their more severe disruption scenarios, not worst-case apocalypse scenarios, just serious sustained disruption scenarios, the numbers they come up with are genuinely alarming. Some of those models show oil reaching between $150 and $200 per barrel under sustained conflict conditions. Let me put that in context for you. Right now, oil is trading somewhere in the range of $70 to $85 per barrel, depending on the day. A move to $150 or $200 would represent roughly a doubling or more of current prices. That is not a small adjustment. That is not something the global economy absorbs quietly and moves on from. That is a shock, a real, painful, economy-altering shock. And it wouldn't stay contained to the energy sector. It never does. Higher oil prices feed into everything: aviation fuel, shipping costs, manufacturing costs, agricultural costs, because farming runs on fuel and fertilizer which is made from natural gas. The entire supply chain of the modern economy has energy baked into it at every single step. So when oil doubles, the cost of producing and moving, basically everything goes up, and those costs get passed on to businesses, to consumers, to you. This is not theoretical. This is just how the system works. We saw a version of it in 2022 when oil spiked after the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And that spike, as painful as it was nowhere near what a serious US-Iran conflict scenario would look like. The 2022 energy shock was a warning. A US-Iran conflict would be something significantly worse. $200 oil, realistic or just hype? Okay, so I know what some of you are thinking right now. $200 a barrel sounds insane. It sounds like a headline designed to scare people. It sounds like the kind of number that gets thrown around to get clicks and views and then never actually happens. And I hear that, I really do. So let me be completely straight with you on this. Let me separate the hype from the reality as honestly as I can. First, is $200 oil guaranteed if conflict breaks out? Number: absolutely not. Nobody can tell you that with certainty. Markets are complicated. There are too many variables, too many moving parts, too many ways things could play out differently than any model predicts. But here is the more important question. Is $200 oil possible? Is it within the range of realistic outcomes in a serious sustained conflict scenario? And the honest answer to that question, based on what serious energy economists and major financial institutions are actually saying, is yes. It is within the range of possibility. Not the base case, not the most likely outcome, but a real scenario that cannot be dismissed as pure fantasy. Let me show you why. Look at history for a second. In 1973, during the Arab oil embargo, oil prices quadrupled in a matter of months. Quadrupled. The global economy went into a tailspin. Gas lines stretched around the block in American cities. The inflation that followed took years to fully work through the system. In 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, oil prices doubled within weeks. Just weeks. And that was a conflict that didn't even directly threaten the Strait of Hormuz the way an Iran conflict would. In 2008, not even a conflict, just a combination of high demand and supply tightness. Oil hit $147 a barrel, without a single shot being fired in a major conflict. Now, take all of those historical data points and ask yourself, what would a direct military conflict between the United States and Iran, involving the Strait of Hormuz due to a market that is already tighter than it was in any of those historical moments. The math is uncomfortable. But here is the other side of this that I want to be fair about. There are real factors that would work against a sustained $200 oil scenario. The United States is now the world's largest oil producer. American shale production can respond to price signals relatively quickly compared to conventional oil fields. If prices spike dramatically, American producers have strong incentives to pump more, and more supply eventually brings prices down. OPEC members, particularly Saudi Arabia, have historically opened their taps during major supply crises to stabilize markets. They have spare capacity sitting available. Not unlimited capacity, but real capacity. And demand destruction is a real phenomenon. When oil prices get extremely high, people and businesses adjust. They drive less. They switch fuels where possible. Industrial activity slows. That reduced demand eventually pushes back against prices. So there are mechanisms that would resist a sustained $200 price level. The question is how long it takes those mechanisms to kick in, and how much pain the world absorbs in the meantime. Because here is the reality of supply responses and demand destruction. They take time, months, sometimes longer. American shale producers don't flip a switch and instantly flood the market. OPEC decisions take negotiation and coordination. Demand adjustments happen gradually. In the immediate aftermath of a serious conflict, those relief valves don't open fast enough to prevent a severe spike. So the honest picture looks something like this. A serious US-Iran conflict involving Strait of Hormuz disruption would almost certainly produce a dramatic and rapid oil price spike. How high and how long it stays there depends on the severity and duration of the conflict, how quickly alternative supplies respond, and how fast demand adjusts. In a short, sharp conflict that gets resolved relatively quickly, maybe prices spike to 120 or 130 and then gradually come back down over several months. In a prolonged, sustained conflict with serious, ongoing Hormuz disruption, the 150 to 200 range becomes genuinely plausible. And even the more moderate scenario, $120 or $130 oil, would be deeply painful for the global economy and for ordinary people everywhere. So, is $200 oil hype? Not entirely. Is it inevitable? Number. Is it a real risk that deserves serious attention? Absolutely yes. What this means for your daily life, okay, so let's bring this all the way down to ground level. Because I think we've spent enough time in the world of geopolitics and oil markets and financial models. Let's talk about what actually matters to most people sitting here watching this video. What does this mean for you, for your family, for your daily life? And I want to be really specific here. Because this isn't just about gas prices. This goes much deeper than that. Let's start with the most obvious one. Gas prices. If oil hits even $120 a barrel, the more conservative conflict scenario, you are looking at gas prices in the United States jumping to somewhere between $5 and $6 a gallon nationally. In high-cost states like California, New York, Hawaii, potentially pushing towards $7 or even $8 a gallon. And if oil gets closer to that 150 to 200 range, we are in territory that most American drivers have never experienced in their lifetime. The kind of prices that force real behavioral changes, where people genuinely start making decisions about whether they can afford to drive to work, whether a second car is sustainable, whether that long commute still makes financial sense. That's not exaggeration. That's just the math. But here's what most people miss. Gas prices are actually the least of it. Think about your grocery bill. Every single item in that grocery store got there on a truck. That truck runs on diesel. When diesel prices double, trucking, costs go up dramatically. And those costs get passed directly to the prices on the shelves. We are talking about food prices going up across the board. Not a little bit, significantly. And it's not just transportation. Fertilizer, which is used to grow essentially all commercial crops, is made primarily from natural gas. When energy prices spike, fertilizer prices spike. When fertilizer prices spike, the cost of growing food goes up. And that cost eventually shows up in what you pay at checkout. We saw a version of this in 2022. After the Russia-Ukraine conflict, global food prices jumped sharply. Grocery bills went up for families everywhere. And that was with oil peaking around $120 to $130 a barrel. Not 200. Now think about your heating and cooling bills. Natural gas prices are closely connected to the broader energy market. An oil price shock of this magnitude would almost certainly drag natural gas prices higher with it, which means heating your home in winter and cooling it in summer gets significantly more expensive. For families already stretching their budgets, that's a real and painful hit. And then there's flying. Jet fuel is a direct derivative of crude oil. When oil prices spike, airline operating costs explode almost immediately. Airlines have two choices: absorb those costs and lose money, or pass them on through higher ticket prices and fuel surcharges. They almost always choose option 2. So that flight you were planning to book, that family vacation, that trip home for the holidays, it just got a lot more expensive. But here's the thing I really want you to sit with for a moment. All of these individual price increases don't happen in isolation. They compound. They stack on top of each other. Higher gas prices mean higher commuting costs. Higher food prices mean less money for everything else. Higher energy bills mean tighter household budgets. Higher travel costs mean less flexibility and less freedom. And all of that happens at the same time, not spread out over years, in the span of weeks or months following a major oil shock. For families that are already living paycheck to paycheck, and there are a lot of them, that kind of simultaneous pressure across multiple areas of the budget is not just uncomfortable, it's genuinely destabilizing. And here is one more thing that doesn't get talked about enough. Interest rates. When energy prices spike, inflation goes up. When inflation goes up, central banks feel pressure to raise interest rates to control it. When interest rates go up, borrowing gets more expensive. Mortgages get more expensive. Car loans get more expensive. Business loans get more expensive. The entire cost of credit in the economy goes up. So an oil shock doesn't just affect what you pay at the pump or the grocery store. It can affect your mortgage payment, your car payment, the interest rate on your credit card, the financial conditions for the business you work for or the business you own. This is how an oil shock becomes an economic shock. This is how something that starts in the Strait of Hormuz ends up at your kitchen table. And I think that's the thing that most people genuinely don't connect. They see news about Iran and think that's over there. That doesn't affect me. But it does. It absolutely does. And if things escalate the way some serious analysts are warning, you will feel it. Your family will feel it. And it will not be subtle. So where does this all leave us? I've taken you through a lot in this video. The history between the US and Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and why it matters so much. What a conflict would actually do to oil markets, whether $200 oil is realistic or just hype, and how all of that filters down into your daily life in very real and very tangible ways. And now I want to leave you with something honest, something that I think is actually more valuable than any prediction or forecast I could give you. Nobody knows exactly how this plays out. I mean that sincerely. The smartest geopolitical analysts in the world, the best energy economists at the biggest financial institutions on the planet, none of them can tell you with certainty what happens next between the US and Iran. There are too many variables, too many decision makers, too many moments where one choice by one person in one room changes the entire trajectory of events. What we do know is this. The situation right now is genuinely more dangerous than it has been in a long time. The diplomatic channels that could have provided an off-ramp, the nuclear deal negotiations, have collapsed. When diplomacy fails, the space for miscalculation grows. And in a region as volatile as the Middle East, miscalculations have a way of cascading into something much larger than anyone intended. We also know that the global oil market has very little cushion right now, very little room to absorb a serious shock without significant price consequences. The buffer that would normally soften a supply disruption simply isn't there the way it needs to be. And we know that the people who study these markets for a living are more nervous right now than they have been in years. That's not nothing. These are not people who panic easily or throw around scary numbers carelessly. When serious analysts start talking about $150 and $200 oil scenarios in the same breath as current events, that deserves attention. But here is what I also want to leave you with. Awareness is not the same as helplessness. Understanding what is happening, really understanding it, not just catching a headline here and there, gives you something. It gives you the ability to think ahead, to make smarter financial decisions, to not be caught completely off guard if things deteriorate. Maybe that means thinking about your transportation costs and whether there are ways to reduce your exposure to gas prices. Maybe it means looking at your energy bills and thinking about efficiency. Maybe it means just, being a little more financially conservative for a while, building a small cushion because the environment we are in right now calls for it. I'm not here to tell you to panic. I'm not here to tell you the world is ending. It isn't. But I am here to tell you that what is happening between the US and Iran right now is not just background noise. It is not just political theater for cable news to fill airtime with. It is a genuine situation with genuine consequences that are already beginning to ripple outward into the global economy. And the more clearly you see it, the better positioned you are. That's why I put this story together. Not to scare you, not to sensationalize something for views, but because I genuinely believe that understanding the world you live in, even the complicated, uncomfortable parts of it, matters. The people who understand what is driving prices, what is shaping markets, what is happening beneath the surface of the headlines, those people make better decisions for themselves, for their families. And that's exactly who I am making these videos for. If this story gave you something, a new perspective, a clearer picture, something that made you think, then please subscribe, because this is exactly what this channel is built around. Going deep on the stories that matter, the ones that connect the dots between what's happening out there in the world and what it means for your life right here at home. I'll see you in the next one.